pazartesi, salı, çarşamba, perşembe, cuma, cumartesi, pazar.
Evet de yani. Welcome to everyone, dear guests, esteemed speakers, dear colleagues. Let me welcome you very warmly to our university to attend a very timely but also very sad discussion. Despite all the philosophical and intellectual achievements and scientific developments, and despite all the efforts to establish human rights and eliminate violence, the human race has seemed to fail. We are still witnessing the slaughter of innocent people in Gaza in front of the entire world in the year 2024. Obviously, we have failed in eliminating tribalism and violence, showing the least respect to others, and forming a shared understanding of human rights and even who is human, who is not. This is very sad in an age when we discuss animal rights. I remember a sentence pronounced decades ago by late Jacques Chirac, then French president, when he gave a speech at UNDP conference about the climate change. He stated straight off that our house, the world, was burning. Needless to say, our house continues to burn, not only physically, but also covering all our values, morals, compassion, civilization norms, and what is left of our humanity. The Middle East has been the theater of many conflicts since the very early times of humanity. Almost every nation, every community in this desolate piece of land has grievances from the past. Nearly all the cultures that live side by side can invoke history to explain, sometimes justify, and legitimize their deeds. Most of such deeds remain unacceptable by universal standards of peace, human rights, human dignity, and freedom. Errors have been committed in the past, sometimes unspeakable tragedies have occurred. There is no single nation, culture, community in the Middle East, and unfortunately elsewhere, that cannot invoke deep-going hatred, despair, feelings of betrayal, injustice, abandonment stemming from their history. To take revenge for recent or distant past events by assassinating civilian people is the lowest degree of inhumane attitude a government, a political movement can take. This is unfortunately what we are witnessing since the last October in Israel and Gaza. The incapacity of the whole international community to end this indiscriminate slaughtering of civilians in Gaza is taking us to a very dangerous spiral. I do not wish to remind you sad moments of recent history, but let me quote Winston Churchill, who said, addressing the Munich conference in 1938, a year before the Second World War, and he quotes that, "This is the only first sip, first foretaste of a bitter cup which will be proffered to us a year after year, unless a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor we arise again and take our stand for freedom as the olden time." He would go, Churchill would go on saying after the end of the war that in Munich the democracies have sacrificed dignity for peace. At the end, they have lost both dignity and peace. This is the great danger. Now, democracies are on the brink of losing all their moral superiority and their raison d'etre in the face of a terrible quagmire. Both the Israeli government and the Hamas have one thing in common. They do not care about Palestinian lives. The unspeakable terror attack that cost the lives of more than 1,200 innocent Jewish civilians have been replicated by the killing of nearly 35,000 Gaza inhabitants, almost 80,000 injured, mostly women, children, and the elderly. What to do when you are an academician whose voice is seldom heard beyond the classroom? This is what the conference today is going to answer. The essential question is how to challenge and stop this madness. Let me thank you all for your participation. Once again, welcome to Bilgi, even if this is for a very unfortunate event. Thank you.
İstanbul Bilgi Üniversitesi'nin saygıdeğer mütevelli heyeti başkanı ve rektörü, Türk basınının kıymetli temsilcileri, sevgili meslektaşlarım, değerli dostlarımız, hanımefendiler, beyefendiler. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel. My task of moderating this panel, which brings together 4 distinguished scientists, does not mean at all that I am in the same league as the speakers. Still, I cannot help but say that I'm proud of this task given to me. Of course, I will turn the floor over to the speakers we are eagerly awaiting, but perhaps it will be useful to give a brief background information about the problematic of the panel. Our panel is inspired by a remarkable phenomenon. For some issues, the Western world's institutions that defend the freedom of expression exclude and sometimes silence voices that diverge from mainstream narratives. We saw the manifestations of this incoherence for the war between Russia and Ukraine. Today, we will discuss it in the context of Palestine's voice. Recent incidents highlight the ongoing challenges faced by those advocating for Palestinian rights. For example, at Columbia University, student protesters were arrested during a demonstration, sparking significant faculty and public backlash. At UCLA, the student protests in support of Palestine were met with harsh administrative responses and threats, highlighting a critical challenge to the principles of free speech on campus. These demonstrations, aiming to voice strong oppositions to Israel's policies, resulted in direct confrontations with university authorities, bringing into sharp focus the limitations imposed on political expression in academic settings. One of the most alarming examples occurred at Emory University in Atlanta. Amid a wave of student protest against Israel's war on Gaza, local and state police executed a violent crackdown on campus encampments. Officers used tear gas, stun guns, and are accused of deploying rubber bullets to disperse students who had set up tents in protest against the war and the planned Cop City Police Training Center. This brutal response, which also led to the arrest of faculty members, including Noel McAfee and Emil Keme, underscores the severe measures taken to suppress campus activism. These examples are a part of a broader pattern of repression. For example, Dr. Fida Wisha was terminated from Arizona Children's Hospital after a pro-Israel group highlighted a critical tweet about Zionism. Deutsche Welle in Germany dismissed journalists of Palestinian descent, accusing them of anti-Israel bias. At the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Professor Steven Salaita's employment offer was rescinded due to his critical tweets about Israel's actions in Gaza. The editor of eLife a prominent scientific journal, was recently dismissed for expressing views on Gaza. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think there is need to cite further cases to observe a systematic problem about how narratives are constructed and disseminated. As we proceed with today's discussions, we will critically examine this problem, starting with a precise understanding, first of concepts and next of facts. Our first speaker, Omer Bartov, will speak on the clarification of concepts as a mean towards peace. He will be followed by Izzeldin Abuelaish, who will speak on the clarification of facts as a means towards peace. Each speaker would have 20 minutes, but Izzeldin asked for 5 minutes more, so he will have 25 minutes. And we will then go for a short coffee break, where you will be able to have exchange with the speakers. After the break, we will have Arlene Clemesha, who will go beyond the Eurocentric perspective and propose a look from the global south. Last but not least, Uğur Özdemir will discuss systemic silencing strategies and how non-state actors challenge regional and international dynamics often dominated by state powers. Again, each speaker will have 20 minutes, and before closing the panel, we will have 30 minutes for a general discussion, which we can extend if there is need. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope our attempt to embrace different perspectives will make a, no doubt modest, but meaningful contribution to efforts to create a more just, inclusive, and peaceful world. Omer, the word is yours.
Thank you. Should I speak from here?
Please, as you wish.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you for being able to visit Turkey and your beautiful city of Istanbul. And thank you for the panelists. We've had a chance to talk a bit over the last couple of days. And before I start, I just want to say a word of acknowledgement to my co-panelist, Abuelaish, Dr. Abuelaish. We had lunch yesterday, and he told us a little bit about his own life and experiences. And I think we were all, I know, we were all deeply moved by that. And in some ways, I was thinking, when we were listening, that it would be sufficient just for all of us to listen to Dr. Abuelaish. But since we're here anyway, and hopefully we'll hear more later on from him, I will also say a few words. I don't think that what we say today is going to provide a solution to the questions raised. I doubt it, but at least maybe some clarifications. So I want to start with an article that was published just a couple of days ago by Zadie Smith, who is an author, a well-known writer, called Shibboleth. And I'm going to cite just a few lines from this because I think they're very apropos to our discussion today. She writes, "It is in the nature of the political that we cannot even attend to ethical imperatives unless we first know the political position of whoever is speaking. Where do you stand on Israel-Palestine? In these constructed narratives, there are always a series of shibboleths, that is, phrases that can't be said, or conversely, phrases that must be said. Once these words or phrases have been spoken, river to the sea, existential threat, right to defend, one state, two states, Zionist, colonialist, imperialist, terrorist, and once positionality is established, then, and only then, will the ethics of the question be attended to or absolutely ignored. The current events are, in fact, perhaps the most acute example in the world of the use of words to justify bloody murder, to flatten and erase unbelievably labyrinthian histories, and to deliver the atavistic pleasure of violent simplicity to the many people who seem to believe that merely by saying something, they make it so. It is no doubt a great relief to say the word Hamas as if it is purely and solely describing a terrorist entity. A great relief to say there is no such thing as the Palestinian people as they stand in front of you. A great relief to say Zionist colonialist state and accept those three words as a full and unimpeachable definition of the state of Israel, not only under the disastrous leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu, but at every stage of its long and complex history, and also to hear them as perfectly sufficient, as a perfectly sufficient description of every man, woman, and child who has ever lived in Israel or happened to find themselves born within it. I'm one of them. It is perhaps because we know these simplifications to be impossible that we insist upon them so passionately. They are shibboleths. They describe a people by defining them against another people, but the people being described are ourselves. The person who says we must eliminate Hamas says this not necessarily because she thinks this is possible, a possible outcome on this earth, but because this sentence is the shibboleth that marks her membership in the community that says so. The person who uses the word Zionist as if that word were an unchanged and unchangeable monolith, meaning exactly the same thing in 2024 and 1948 as in 1890 or 1901 or 1920, that person does not so much bring definitive clarity to the entangled history of Jews and Palestinians as they successfully and soothingly draw a line to mark their own zone of interest and where it ends. And while we all talk, carefully curating our shibboleths, presenting them to others, and waiting for them to reveal themselves as with us or against us, while we do all that, bloody murder. So that's just a quote from this article, and I strongly recommend it because it puts things in a proper perspective. It doesn't take a position. It just talks about terminology. And for the next 10, 12 minutes, I want to talk about this terminology. So a few weeks ago, I wrote a paper and presented it in some places. It was published in various places in several versions that I called the Never Again Syndrome and the Weaponization of Language. And that's where I would like to take you. So as you know, at the end of World War II, many countries came up with a formulation for the future, which was never again. Plus jamais, ni wieder. It went up everywhere. What was not entirely clear was what was to never happen again. What was this never again? And I would propose that there were three ways of thinking about that never again. One was never again the Holocaust, specifically the genocide of the Jews. Now that was a very easy commitment to make because the Holocaust was over. It already ended when all these slogans went up. And so to say that never again the Holocaust, history does not repeat itself, much as we sometimes think it does. And so that thing would not happen again. Committing oneself to it was a nice political trick, but it didn't really mean anything. The second was never again a genocide of the Jews. Now that is the mantra that the State of Israel took up. It presented itself to itself and to the world as the answer to the Holocaust. So the state of Israel would make sure that the Holocaust would never, that a genocide of the Jews would never happen again. Of course, if we look at it now, you could say that while that was the commitment, and a Holocaust of, or a genocide of the Jews has never happened again, ironically, today Israel is probably the least safe place for Jews in the world. So in that sense, the state of Israel has not quite met the challenge. But at least it could argue that this was its raison d'etre, or as the German chancellor called it, its Staatsräson. The third was never again a genocide, any genocide. And that, of course, that promise was never kept, because after 1945, there were endless genocides. There were many, many cases of genocide. Importantly, the discussion over genocide began only in the 1990s. So the Genocide Convention, which was agreed upon in large part as a response to the crimes by the Nazis in World War II, was really invoked only 40 years later. And the reason that there was a 40-year gap was the Cold War. During the Cold War, a bipolar world had no time to debate this issue internationally. And it was only after the fall of the Soviet Union, with the genocide in Bosnia and then the genocide in Rwanda, that new tribunals, international tribunals, were established to adjudicate these cases of genocide. But one can say that by and large, that promise, never again, was not kept. Now, I'm go in a moment to the question of genocide specifically for the case of what is happening right now in Gaza. The second term that I want to say, to touch on quickly, is anti-Semitism. Now, the term anti-Semitism has been invoked often in the recent past. Over the war in Gaza, we hear a lot of talk about anti-Semitism. It's important to recognize that anti-Semitism is a real and present danger. It is not something that does not exist. It's not a fantasy. It's a reality. But it's also important to understand that anti-Semitism has been also used or weaponized in a way that is meant to silence speech. And we have seen that repeatedly, as was mentioned earlier, and during the protests on American campuses, were students who were protesting against Israeli actions in Gaza were said to be motivated by anti-Semitism, despite the fact that many of them were actually Jews. And what they were protesting about was about what they saw, I believe quite rightly, as breaches of any kind of humanitarian law, of decency, of international law. And so one element of this weaponization of anti-Semitism is the definition that was created by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, which has now become law in the United States, as the Congress has just voted on it, and has been also accepted, although it's not law, in Germany, and which serves to silence criticism of Israeli policies that can easily, according to that definition, be defined as anti-Semitic. And this has been pushed by the Israeli government for a long period of time. The third term I want to touch on very briefly is the term Holocaust. Even earlier today, I was asked about that. The term Holocaust is used by everyone and often misused and abused, weaponized in ways that I think are unhelpful. In Israel, of course, any threat to the Jewish state any security threat, real or perceived, is seen as a potential Holocaust, so that there would be another genocide of the Jews. And it's become a very strong sentiment within the Israeli public. It's something that in fact became increasingly so from the 1980s. It is not, we can talk about why, but it doesn't start like that in 1948. It takes several decades before fears of the Holocaust become part of how Israeli citizens think about their reality. And so, for instance, the phrase that has been used since October 7th is that the Hamas attack on October 7th was the greatest killing of Jews since the Holocaust. Once you say that, it immediately triggers fears within the public. These sort of memories, mostly, of course, not direct memories, indirect memories of the genocide of the Jews are triggered. But Holocaust is used also by critics of Israel. And there are arguments saying, well, what the Jews are doing to the Palestinians now is what the Nazis did to the Jews in the past. I find that to be a very unhelpful analogy. It doesn't help understand what is happening on the ground. It obfuscates things. It says exactly what Zadie Smith, whom I cited earlier, says. It clarifies your positionality. It puts you in a particular place rather than actually explaining what is happening on the ground, and it evokes certain memories and makes certain analogies that may make you feel comfortable, but doesn't actually explain what is happening, and of course, how do we actually respond to it. The third term, very quickly, is genocide, and the term genocide has been used over and over again. And I'll just say the following about it. People use the term genocide when they want to describe something terrible that is happening, atrocities, mass killing of civilians, destruction of cities, displacement of populations, concerted military violence. And all those actions are indeed actions that can be described often as criminal, as unacceptable, as immoral, as unethical, and so forth. But they're not necessarily genocide. Now, different people have different definitions of what genocide is, and they're, of course, welcome to their own definitions, and many scholars have different definitions of genocide as well. And you can read books on genocide where one scholar or another says, this is genocide, this is how I understand it. But the only definition that matters in international law is the definition of 1948 by the United Nations Convention on the crime and on the perpetration and prevention of the crime of genocide. That's the only definition that matters. If you actually want to find a country guilty, or individuals of that country guilty of genocide in an international legal setting. And for that, you need particular elements, the most important of which are intent, that you can show that there is an intent to destroy a group as such. That is, that you are not killing people as individuals, you are killing them or destroying them as members of a particular group, and that you're doing that intentionally, that that's what you set out to do. That's obviously a very difficult thing to prove, and often it takes a long time to prove that, because you have to find the documentation that would show that there was a premeditated plan to destroy a particular population, and that that plan was implemented in whole or in part. And I find that using the term genocide outside of that definition is again more of a statement of where one stands rather than an explanation of what one is seeing on the ground. Two quick last things I want to say. One is on international law in general. So international law, and we are all, of course, watching what is unfolding and saying, why doesn't it stop? why does the international community not do something? What was the point of this system of international law, this entire edifice of international law that was put into place after 1945 as a result of the horrific crimes of World War II? Why is that not kicked into place? Why is this going on? And of course, the problem with international law is that it's international law. That is, that it's the law of states, that it comes into implementation by agreement between states, that it has to do with the United Nations. The United Nations is an assembly of states, and not all states are the same as others. Some states are more powerful than other states, and some states, since 1945, sit in the Security Council, and those states have a veto power. And the Security Council is the only body of the UN that can actually implement decisions made by other bodies of the UN. So if the International Court of Justice says, now we're issuing provisional measures, say, about Russia or about Israel, those provisional measures can only be implemented through the Security Council that then can decide on sanctions, can decide on various other actions. But in the Security Council, there's veto power. And the veto power of Russia means that, okay, so there are provisional measures against Russia. What are you going to do about it? Provisional measures, if there aren't any, about human rights in China, well, China can veto that. And provisional measures about Israel, the United States can veto that and has vetoed it. And so, in that sense, we have to understand that the international community is made up of these states. Now, how do we change that? And that's the last thing I want to say here. The way we can change this is only through civil action in countries where civil action matters. In some countries, it doesn't really matter. In China, there won't be civil action right now because people will be suppressed very quickly. The same in Russia. But in the United States, civil action can actually matter. That is, politicians have to get elected. And in order to get elected, they need people to support them. If people do, in fact, continue demonstrating on campuses, if other people, not only students, continue putting pressure on their own government to change its policies, that can matter. And so to my mind, the one thing that we all must understand is not only to say cynically, well, there's international law, but it doesn't really matter. We can say we can have an impact on the way our own governments act within the international community by civil action, rather than sitting at home or using terminology, as A.D. Smith says, just to make ourselves feel good, just to position ourselves vis-a-vis our own group, to actually go out and act in order to change our own government's policies. I believe that this is actually happening now in the United States. I think there's a change in public opinion vis-a-vis the kind of automatic support for Israel. I think there's a change in Germany, despite the government's policies right now. It takes time, unfortunately, and time is very short right now because people are being killed on a daily basis. But that is one way that we can actually make the international community work in ways that we want it to work and that it isn't working right now. Thank you.
Omer, thank you very much for this beautiful clarification. And now the word is yours, dear Izzeldin.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for dedicating this morning for the Palestinians, in particular in Gaza Strip, because there is a moral responsibility if those who are killed, who are slaughtered, who are under fire, who are deprived, hungry, thirsty, homeless, they come to speak. We are here to speak in their voice and not to talk, to take action. As a medical doctor, I am a medical doctor, I am a gynecologist. If a woman is in labor, she is not waiting for me to talk to her. She is waiting for me to give her medication to cure and to deliver the baby to be safe and secure. And that's what we want today to speak about. It's not, history is important. In medicine, we take the history in order for what? To reach accurate diagnosis and to set up the right treatment, not to start to talk about the history. A patient, I come to ask him, what do you feel? How do you feel? He will leave me. He wants, by the end, the prescription and the medication to be cured and to be healed. And that's what we need. And I will start as a Muslim. Jesus said, seek the truth, and the truth sets you free. And I hope today we live here to be free as a human and to behave as a human. I heard you, Omer, thank you so much for what you described. We speak about concepts, definitions. Who define? Who should define these concepts? Genocide, Holocaust. Based on what? And what is the goal? And that's important. Is it for a political agenda to serve a limited political individual agenda or what? It depends on who you are and where you are. As health, as a freedom, as justice, as life, depend on who you are and where you are. The life of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is different from the life of the American administration and the people who are talking about it. So we need to take the context, and most important, the history and the data. Concepts that we are talking about are not sacred. They are not Quran. They are not from God. They are people like us. They define it. And we live in a dynamic world, changing world. Personally, I define health, and I write about it, different from what it has been defined in 1948. So that's important. We need to think and not to take anything for granted. We should question these definitions. It's based on a certain context and a certain individual people to serve their own interest. And they can't be generalized and to be implemented on everyone. Life is dynamic and concepts are dynamic. While we need to speak about facts. Fact is based on evidence, and I will show you now the facts and the truth. Facts are facts, and the states are fixed. I will speak about the facts which are spreading around the world. You see it, you hear it, you feel it, and you are touched by it. These are the facts, and these are the concepts that we need to speak about. Not to start arguing genocide, Holocaust, or what is peace, what is freedom, what is justice. We need to transform. You spoke about the power of the countries. The power of the countries, which power? The military power, the financial, or the power, the human power, and the justice? Because we want to have order in our world. There is no problem in the international law. The problem is in the international community and the powerful countries that you are talking about, which are polarized, biased, indifferent, selective, even complicit in the genocide of what is happening in Gaza now. It's not Israel who are killing the Palestinians. The Americans are the ones who are killing. It's American weapons, American financial and economic support to Israel, and political impunity to Israel. And that's what we need to expose it. And that's what is happening now in the situation around the world. That's why the world is discordant. It's discordant. They are controlling it. And even the Security Council, it has been formed in 1945. And now the world changed. It was less than 2 billion people. Now it's 8 billion people. Countries who formed it, how many countries were there at that time? Now 190 countries. Everything changed in the world. Do we want to live with the history with what is happening, controlled, dominated by these biased, superior country, because they deal in a discriminative, racist, and superiority. When you speak about Ukraine, what about the Americans? What are they doing? Give me one country where the Americans, they went to and they left a good legacy. History repeats itself. What happened in Vietnam and the demonstrations, it's happening now. Where are we from the freedom of speech? As a Palestinian, I am not allowed to carry the kufiya. I am not allowed to speak or to carry Palestinian flag. Where is the humanity that they are talking? Where is the democracy? Where are their human rights? We lost faith in the international human rights conventions. They are not sit there in Geneva just to read and to teach about it. We implemented them in order to live by these values. And that's what is needed from all of us. The situation in Gaza, I want to ask all of you, as a human, not to politicize. Can you tolerate to be disconnected from internet for 30 minutes? How do you feel when you are disconnected? And that's the life for the Palestinians in Gaza now. The Palestinians in general, I am talking, the Palestinian people, which is a nation. Have you tried to die from the cold because you don't have winter clothes and you can't find winter clothes for you or your children? Come and tell me, how much do you feel about this? Then you speak with me as a Palestinian. Have you experienced having your life as a woman to be pregnant in her last month during war? What are you going to do? Have you experienced how she will give birth in the middle of the night or under bombardment in the 21st century, what we call the civilized world? Have you tried going out with your pregnant wife and you tried to be pregnant even during war? How do you feel? Do you know that mother's milk, the mother's milk was cut off from their breasts due to fear and lack of food? Have you experienced the feeling of your son born in a bathroom or in the street, in a car? Have you experienced the feeling of not finding a single piece of clothing for the newborn baby that should celebrate this new life coming to our world? Have you experienced the feeling your son is curled up in his face on a mattress of fear of the bombardment and the killing, that he will be killed the next moment? Have you experienced to have a chronic disease and not to have a medication? Or your mother, you can't support her? Or your father with a dialysis and he is dying in front of your eyes? And then come to talk to me about these concepts. Then come to talk to me about genocide and others. This is the genocide because it's intentional, it's avoidable. For me, maternal mortality, we call it, maternal mortality is avoidable. I can prevent it. Once I can prevent it, if I continue to watch it, it means I intend to do it. So to be deprived, to be hungry, for me, as a Palestinian, I am a Palestinian refugee who was born, raised, and lived in Jabalia refugee camp. I am a survival of parents who survived the Nakba, who were expelled from their homeland in 1948 to face the atrocities of occupation and suffering, deprived, abject poverty. I never tasted my childhood, but thanks to my parents who were illiterate. They lost their homeland, they lost the land, but they kept their faith in their children. We have to succeed. We are a living nation and we have to continue to live. They invested in us. We have to find our way in education. And because in this world which is unjust, can kill, can occupy, can oppress, Even these days in Gaza Strip, the Palestinians are determined to be educated. Yesterday I was watching a friend of mine. They are discussing a master thesis in the tents in the Gaza Strip. So the education is holy for the Palestinians. So I find my way through the education, and my life was a war. Because war is not the soldier who is going to kill and to be killed. It's about women and the children. War is not to be documented or to talk about it. War is to be prevented as diseases to be prevented. I was fighting just to survive. And Palestinians, they are not fond of fighting. They are fighting just to survive, to be free, to be equal, to be dignified, to be independent as any other nation on earth. Because for any human being, justice and the freedom are essential, crucial to our dignity and our ability to be fully human. And if the dead, if the weak, if the killed, and the victims can't cry or speak out, it's the moral, ethical, and the human duty and the responsibility of the living, of all of us, to act and speak out for them. I hope by the end of this session to come up with the conclusion, with the recommendation, what actions can we do in order to speak, not just to discuss it and to leave. Truth is the cornerstone of justice and accountability. That's important. You spoke about never again, but why? It's repeated, never again. Because lack of accountability. Lack of accountability just since 2000 till now, 8 wars. 2008, 2012, 14, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23. Why? It's repeated, and we said never again, because lack of accountability and complicity of the United States and the impunity provided to Israel by the United States, which is destructive, not only to Israelis, to the Palestinians, to the international community. We lost faith in the international community and the Security Council to be controlled by one country, the veto. Accountability is essential because the one who is secure or safe from punishment, when they misbehave, they will continue to misbehave. So accountability is essential, and that's what we need. The life in the Gaza Strip before October 7, because it didn't start October 7. October 7, there we have October 6, we have October 5, 2003, 2020, 2021, 2008, 1967, 1948. The world is not created October 7, 2023. And that's what we need to look around and to ask why it happened and what is behind it. The life in the Gaza Strip before October 7, every 5 children, 4 were mentally disordered. 4 children were mentally disordered. And we need to ask why. And that's why when the patient comes to me, I ask, why did you come to me? I have to ask what are the reasons behind it. The reasons is the continuous, cumulative, existential occupation and the threat. That's the big elephant in the room, and that's what we need to speak about it. We want to get rid of the big elephant, where the people can be free. We speak about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not. I don't believe in this term. It's not post. It's a continuous, cumulative. It's a continuous, cumulative stress disorder of the Palestinian people, not only the children. It was Gaza before October 7. It's no longer Gaza. It was hopeless, lifeless, jobless, helpless, freeless. Now it's a hell. It's a ghost. Mass murder, mass destruction, mass displacement, and mass suffering. And you see the streets are not the streets, it's lightless. gasless, helpless. A cup of water in Gaza is more expensive than a cup of blood. Do we bleed? I appeal to this world. Do we bleed the same color or not? Is my blood as a Palestinian different from others? Am I different from anyone in this world? We succeeded as Palestinians to make life from death. And we as Palestinians, we don't believe in impossible things. We are determined to create our freedom and to get our freedom from the holy souls of noble blood of our Palestinian people. We will never give up. We will never forget them. And personally, I am determined that the holy souls and noble blood of those martyrs who were killed in the way for the freedom of Palestinians to be injected, to be transfused into a vein of hope, of life, of dignity, of justice, and the freedom for the Palestinian people and around the world. We speak about the concept of peace. What is peace? Because we use this word even without asking what is peace. Peace of whom? And for whom? And what are the requirements for peace? Peace is not just a word or a concept. Peace is a way of life where you live it and you feel it. Peace is a relationship between us and the environment in which we live. Do we have peace with Earth? We don't have. Even we see the climate change. So peace is a relationship between us, within and between us. And there are certain requirements. Number one, we need respect. Respect of human rights, equal rights. We need justice. We need freedom. We need equality. And we need dignity for all. If any of these values, virtues are not fulfilled, it's violence. Because violence happens when we violate someone's rights, dignity, freedom, or life. So we need to avoid these violations. And we need to change the context of the Palestinian people. And Palestinian people, I can say to you, I assure you, they are ready. As myself started and experienced all of what happened in my life, from the killing of my daughters, from being a refugee, where I am now, and lately the killing of my nephews and nieces, we are ready to start from zero. And we will start from zero, to rebuild and to revive our life. This zero should be accompanied, should be attached, should be linked with the freedom, with justice, equality, dignity, and accountability of the perpetrators, where the world will benefit from it. I appeal to you and to come by the conclusion, by the end, to call for immediate ceasefire. This is what is needed, to call for the international community to follow the Turkish government, to start imposing actions to lead to ceasefire. And that's what we need in our world. And the Palestinian issue, it's not the Palestinians who will benefit from it. It's the international community. The Palestinian issue now, it's a universal, a global issue. Someone thought the Palestinian issue, forget it, put it in the drawers. Now it's the core, it's the top issue in the world. No freedom in this world as long as Palestinians are not. No stability in this world without the stability and the justice for the Palestinians. So it's a critical, a global issue where the world has to come together to put an end to the occupation and to help the Palestinians to achieve their freedom. And personally, I see October 7 as an opportunity. It's a silver lining opportunity. It's a new page in the history of the world that the dawn and the light of the Palestinians is coming soon, inshallah. So I will start just
6 minutes.
Okay. You see it, 1948. That's 1948. History repeats itself. In 1948, where the Palestinians experienced the Nakba, and now the Palestinians experience another Nakba, which is man-made, it's intentional, and that's what is happening. You see the Palestinians moving from the north to the south, and now they are moving back from the south to the north. They went back, as in 1948, to live in tents where they built their houses. I am sure each of you, you have your own house. Your home, you build it, and you invested in it. And Palestinians, they invested in their children. They invested in their houses. They worked hard for it. And the house is not the house, the stones. It's the memory. It's the life. The house is the privacy. It's the dignity. You see, how was it in 1948? You see these photos. You know who are these? What do you think of these girls? What do you think of these girls? These are my daughters. That's Bisan, who was 21 years old. That's Mayar in the middle, who was 15 years old. That's Aya, who was 14 years old. I raised them to be human, to be educated. I am proud of them. And this is my niece Noor, who was 17 years old. In 2008, 16th of January 2009, when the Israeli army bombarded my house, killing Bisan, Mayar, Aya, and Noor. For nothing they did. And there was no reason to be killed. They know my house. Because I was the first Palestinian doctor to practice medicine in an Israeli hospital. I wanted them to know who are the Palestinian people. They were killed for nothing they did. And my answer to that was, through the book I wrote, I Shall Not Hate, a Gaza doctor journey on the road to peace and the human dignity. This, where they are, you see it even. The first thing, when I go back to Palestine, to Gaza, before going to my home, I go to visit their graves. To renew the oath I gave to them that I didn't give up. I didn't forget you, Bisan, Mayar, Aya, and Noor. Always I was worried about their graves. Even the graves were not safe. They were damaged. The graves, even the dead Palestinians, are not safe. I go there with my children when we go immediate to visit their graves. And even the invisible consequences. We know what is going on, the kills, the numbers. But what about the hidden death that is waiting for the Palestinians? The long-term consequences of war, the broken hearts, minds, souls. You see, 9,000 women. It's a war against women and the children because of the value of women and the children in the Palestinian cause. And that's what is happening. And 31st of October, only 22 of my nephews and nieces were killed when they bombarded my sister's house. And you see them, they're turned into piles of bodies. And that's what it means when we speak about genocide, the intention. Because it was preceded by incitement and the intention to kill, because they called Palestinians human animals. And they started the collective punishment. And if they don't intend it, so why you don't stop it? You can stop it if you want to avoid it. And that's what is happening. Even this is the American administration, the Vice President Pence, what he is writing on the weapons. He is sending his congratulations to kill the Palestinian people. Is this an intention or not? It's an intention which is translated into action. And that's the genocide. You see the Palestinians. I don't want to bring any more photos. You see how they treated the Palestinian prisoners, the torture, and the newborn babies. You see Hiroshima. How is it, and Gaza Strip, how it was and how is it now? almost even the mass graves in the hospitals. Mass graves in the hospitals and the health workers. You see them. And the numbers. And that's what is happening. But I will keep hopeful. We have faith in our rights, and we have our commitment, as I said, to those martyrs, not to give up. And I hope you can join to put an end to this genocide and to the suffering of your human fellows, the Palestinians, and to celebrate one day the freedom of the Palestinians and the end of the occupation. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Izzeldin, my brother, thank you very much. We heard you very profoundly as a father, as a man of peace. Thank you very much for this beautiful intervention. So now we will be giving a break, 25 minutes. So we will be starting at quarter to noon. 11.45'te yeniden başlayacağız. Konuşmacılarımızla dışarıda sohbet edebiliriz. Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Thank you very much.
seslerine.
The Bilgi University, all the organizers, all those who made a huge effort, I'm sure, to make this happen. I know how much work goes into organizing such things. I'm always organizing events for Palestine at the University of São Paulo. And thank you to all of you who are here. We've had two amazing approaches to the subject, and especially the opportunity to listen to the Palestinian perspective, depoimento, how we say that in English, speech, his words, his view, his feelings, his very acute explanation of what is happening today before the eyes of the world, of everyone, which is unbelievable. I'd like to start remembering here and introducing actually to you the words of the great Uruguayan, from Uruguay, the writer Eduardo Galeano, who passed away in 2015. He once wrote, "Who gave Israel the right to deny all rights?" So that's not a rhetorical question. It's a very concrete question. It shouldn't be understood simply as a cry of someone who is lamenting what is happening, but maybe even as a methodological orientation of how to approach this subject. 1947, when the United Nations granted decided to divide the territory of Palestine, of historic Palestine, giving half of this territory, slightly more than half, for a people who were colonizing the land and coming from abroad. The countries who were part of the UN there, they knew very well what was happening. And at that moment, those countries who voted in favor, they authorized the colonization, and they authorized the dispossession of the Palestinians as a product of the birth of Israel. Because this was discussed already at the time, that partition of a land, partition of Palestine, meant displacement. It meant dispossession. And actually the term transfer was openly used by colonialists, imperialists, when they were approaching the subject. It was used in official documents. It was used since the Peel Commission report, since the first partition plan in 1937. It was not new. So when Brazil, in fact, my country, presided that session, Osvaldo Aranha, our top diplomat, who was apparently actually acting with more liberty than he maybe should have, because it's difficult to find the documents saying that he had the authorization to go as far as he did in supporting partition. They knew that partition also meant displacement. And not only did they know that it meant displacement by then, it was in fact already displacing Palestinians. Because in 1930, the British Passfield White Paper already came to a conclusion in 1930 that Jewish immigration to Palestine was taking land from the Arab fellahin, from the Arab land workers, and was creating a class of landless and unemployed. And this was the origin of the conflict that was already there in 1929, that had already erupted in 1929. So, but I'm not here to teach you Palestinian history, or which is something which I do in my classroom with my students, or to characterize the conflict or this and that. I'm here to give you a perspective from Brazil, from what today we call as part of the global South, And I want to start just saying very rapidly that I have a personal experience, and I hope to try to bring a perspective from the South. As a personal experience, I must say that for now, I mean, I created the first course of Palestinian history in Brazilian universities. Every year for 2 semesters, I have 80, 90 students studying Palestinian history. And I've never had any problems, no problems at all. There's always a very large disposition to learn, listen, read, and discuss without being, conducted by the forces, that try to maneuver, manipulate the discourse in favor of one or the other. So there's a very large disposition because we're not directly involved, except for when Osvaldo Aranha presided the 1947 partition of Palestine. Brazil hasn't been directly involved in colonizing, supporting, such as the U.S. or other countries, or Britain before the U.S. and so on, even Soviet Union in '48 and so on. But so there's, and I've also been in so many situations, always speaking my mind, always speaking freely, always with a very acute preoccupation to refer to books, refer to sources. But as long as I'm doing that, I've never faced any problems at all in Brazil, in Brazilian academy, in Brazilian media, which is very much disputed. Although it's very much disputed, also we're there, we can speak our voice, we can say what we have always been able to say, what we want, although this is, there are organizations trying to change this today. But up to now, this has been possible. As a perspective from the South, I'd like to begin saying that, well, the colonization of Palestine in the 20th century, not only is it singular because it's a late form of colonization, but it's the conjunction of 2 simultaneous endeavors. First, it's, and we must not forget, it's a Jewish nationalist, settler colonialist project. Some would call Zionist. That could be the term used. But if you don't want to immediately use this term and try to understand a bit better what the term might mean for different people, you can divide it up to say it's a Jewish nationalist, settler colonialist project. It has all of these characteristics in it. And second, it's an imperialist project of fragmentation and domination over Arab lands for economic and geopolitical purposes. And it is up to today. Also this imperialist project, or you could say new imperialist project, and that is also where we can find openings, of which countries stand outside this project of domination and of control of Arab territories and of Palestine as a means of controlling the region for an economic project. Well, so it's a double and it's a combined form of colonization that was, as I said, authorized in 1920. It began when the mandate was created. In 1947, it was authorized again. It meant transfer, and they knew that it meant the transfer of the Palestinian people, or that it would possibly imply it would be a consequence, and this was already something that was known at the time. So the first thing to understand from our perspective outside is that it is world responsibility. It's not like speaking about the Russian-Ukrainian war. It's not comparable. We're talking about something that was created by the world. It's world responsibility. The UN recognizes it's UN responsibility, but the Security Council is so tied that it cannot act on this. So the world has to find other ways of acting on this. Now, if we go back to the question of Zionism, and I was saying that on the one hand, well, it can be understood in various different ways. If you are Israeli, if you are Jewish, if you come from whatever background you come as Israeli and Jewish, and whatever is your story, your history, your relation to Israel, you can understand Zionism in so many different ways. So I'm not going to go into this here, but I want to call to your attention an article by a dear friend and fabulous academic called Raif Zreik, a Palestinian. He has a very useful paper which is called "When Does a Settler Become Native?" And in this paper, he recognizes that Zionism has these 2 basic aspects. It's nationalism and it is settler colonialism. And to make this short, he says that while the Palestinian should and is, in his opinion, prepared to recognize the nationalism in Zionism and to compromise with nationalism and with the idea that the Jews are there to stay. And that they, they have, rights and nationalist rights, and they're there, and they have their own national rights that can be, accommodated in one another way. They cannot compromise with settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is something that the Palestinians cannot compromise with. It means supremacy, it means segregation, it means exploitation, it means exploitation of the land, it means disappropriation of the land. It means a series of actions, laws, processes that have been imposed on the Palestinians, bringing us to the place where we are today. So in 1950, for example, Israel recently passed the law of return, by which any Jew can go to Israel and immediately be a citizen. And the Palestinian who had just left his place of birth and the place where his family was for centuries and centuries and centuries, he could not go back. He had no place there. And those who stayed gained, there was a new term created, which is absolutely, let's say, innovative, to say the least. The Palestinians who remained, but were dislocated from their properties, their houses, or those who had just gone out and come back, they suddenly became the present absent. So it was a new way of, categorizing a whole segment of the population, 100 to 150 people, 1,000 people, Palestinians who had remained in what became Israel. They were now the present absent. It means they were there, physically they were there, they had no rights. They were the vanquished, leftover population. They were prisoners, and they were subjected prisoners in many ways, and even in ghettos that were created in '48, and subjected to the administrative laws that the British had left behind, the so-called the so-called emergency laws and military rule as well. In 2018, to jump to the present, came the basic law of the nation state, which consolidated the idea that the Palestinians did not have any national representation inside Israel. Only Jews have national representation inside Israel, according to this law, which is one of the latest developments of this whole trend. In 1950, going back to 1950, also there was the absentee property land that was passed. So all the property, all the land, all the farms, all the businesses, all the cars, all the houses that were, let's say, left behind, thinking that they would come back immediately, rapidly, they were incorporated into state land, state-owned land. So 1948, in this sense, was seen by people at the time, such as Konstantin Zureik, who was the first historian to use the term and to coin the term Nakba. He was Syrian of origin, and he wrote about, in 1948, about what was happening. But in his view, the Nakba was the culmination of a process. Almost, he wrote, as if it were possibly the end of the process. What could get worse? What could be worse? Now they had to struggle to have their rights back, to be able to come back, to have the right of return granted to them. However, this created the idea of a Nakba as an event of the past. 3 decades later, Elias Khoury, the Lebanese writer, he developed through his writing the idea that the Nakba is actually an ongoing process. And if we understand the Nakba as an ongoing process, then 1967 is not the repetition of 48, and 2023 is not the repetition of 48. Actually, what we're seeing is a process that never ended, and it is deepening and deepening and deepening. Now, why is it important in Elias Khoury's view to recognize correctly the nature of this process and the ongoing nature of this process, not to make mistakes, for example, as the Oslo Accords? The Oslo Accords, according to Elias Khoury, they became a capitulation of the Palestinian leadership because the Palestinian leadership took the Nakba for an event of the past. Had it understood that the Nakba was ongoing, it could never have accepted to deliver the right of national liberation in face of the Israeli establishment that was not recognizing the Palestinian state, in face of the hope of a process that would eventually lead to a country, which never did, because the Nakba only deepened the process, therefore, of segregation, which is at the heart of this this whole history of 100 years, culminating in everything that, to make it short, what we're seeing today and what we've heard today already. So as a historian, teaching in class and with my students, I've always understood segregation as being at the heart of this process. Of course, it can be viewed in different ways, and it is viewed in different ways. But so for certain, segregation is an important aspect of this, so as the aspect of apartheid. Apartheid is a term that was not born in this context, but it serves very well to describe what is happening. And as international community, from our point of view, from my standpoint, my position is not to propose solutions, but to try to understand what is happening and support whatever kind of formation, model, proposal comes out from the Palestinian in first place, from the victim in the first place, from the one who is the victim of this process of silencing, which is also part of the whole matter. So, but the case is that today there is really no formula on the table. Actually, there's no table. And when there is no table and no formula, what do? Well, one option is to go back to human rights and international law. And that is what the international community, in face of this extreme moment in which we are living, has been doing, not in the rhythm and in the pace that we would wish for certain, but we've seen very important outcomes. For example, in the first place, the most important of all, was South Africa going to the International Court of Justice with a process against Israel under the Rome Statute for genocide, for the crime of genocide. And the International Court of Justice coming to the preliminary conclusion that there is a plausible case of genocide going on at this moment. The countries supporting South Africa in this case reveal very much what we're talking about when we speak about those who are not or who would wish not to grant Israel the right to do what it is doing, to disregard human rights. The Islamic Organization the Organization of Islamic Countries, Malaysia, Turkey, the Arab League, Bolivia, Maldives, Namibia, Pakistan, Colombia, Chile, Brazil at the last moment also supported South Africa in this case. On the 10th of January, Brazil came forward. And at the same time, and this was less known because, you're not in Brazil and reading the Brazilian media, but at the same moment, President Lula also declared that Brazil was suspending military contracts with Israel. Also on the 10th of January. It doesn't mean all the contracts, but it meant the contracts that his predecessor, Bolsonaro, had begun negotiating, in some cases already signed with Israel. So he did suspend a great deal of military contracts at the same moment in which he adhered to the process of supporting South Africa then. China also, in a very amazing, impressive move at the International Court of Justice again. China, it was not the case against Israel for apartheid, but for occupation. It was the case that judges occupation, that rules on occupation. China said that the Palestinians have, under international law, the right of defense under whatever means they have. So, and this is a fact. The right of defense against a military occupation deemed illegal is legal under international law. So, who gave the Palestinians? Who took the Palestinian right of defense away? That is the second question we should ask. Not only who granted Israel the right to deny all rights, but who took the Palestinians their right to defend themselves away? That is also very much part of the problem. Nicaragua also took Germany to the ICJ on a case against German arms sales to Israel. They picked one of so many cases that could happen and that could be judged around the world. So, in fact, because of these cases, because of public opinion, because of what is happening throughout the world, because the world is not only, the main powers and what the media and the main powers are saying, but public opinion has very much, for the first time in so much time, condemned in non-compromising terms what Israel is doing in Gaza, because the world can see that it is killing children, that it is killing women, that it's not eliminating a combatant force, that, you know, they can see that this is a case of genocide. You know? They can see that this is something that, again, in Brazil, President Lula, since the beginning, has called this genocide. It's not a political position. You know, it's also based on what the world has in terms of international law come to the conclusion of what genocide is. Now, there's one final aspect I'd like to mention when we're talking about the Global South, is that indeed we are, in many, many aspects, less tied to twisted narratives, to forceful ideas of upheld by those who have the most interest in dominating, in keeping the situation as it is, you know. And again, just remembering what Lula said, which caused so much debate and controversy at the African summit, and it was not by chance that it was at the African summit that Lula said this. He spoke his mind, you know, and he said, listen, never before have we seen what is happening today in Gaza, except for when Hitler decided to exterminate the Jews. Does this mean that he was comparing the Holocaust to the genocide in Gaza? No. I mean, you can compare if you want. As a historian, you can compare and show the differences. You can say how different these two cases are. They're both singular. They're not the repetition one of the other. The methods, the historical process behind them, they're all different. But it's not a problem to say exactly what you can see. And you don't have to always be tied and to twisted and to forceful narratives that are there to support and impede the solution, you know, to blind us to what the solution could be. So that is something that I think that the Global South is showing. But at the same time, answers are not coming as fast and as emphatic, because we all know that if there's one country that could stop what is happening, this country is the U.S. And the question in the end is how to make the U.S. stop this genocide, how to make the U.S. stop sending arms, how to make the U.S. stop supporting what Israel is doing, how to make the U.S. stop vetoing resolutions at the Security Council, the only ones which would be possibly binding. So in the end, you know, the solutions brought about by the Global South always indicate what can be done, since we cannot do exactly what has to be done. And the solutions and the answers brought about are always in terms of speaking what you see, speaking the truth, giving the facts, and isolating the one which is perpetrating. And while Israel is a lot more isolated, infinitely more isolated than it was before this all happened, the US is still acting quite freely to do what it wants. You know? So the perspective is not good, but certainly if one cannot try, one will never be able to, you know, walk with a less heavy conscience on our backs, although it is already forcefully a very heavy conscience that lays on the world today. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Arlene. Uğur, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Abi. I also extend my heartfelt thanks to the Istanbul Bilgi University for bringing us together. It's a true honor to be part of it. It needs vision and courage to do something like this. I had initially planned a talk on digital activism, solidarity, polarization on social media, and I was planning to use a semi-academic tone, concepts and theories and everything. While I'll still touch some of these topics to honor my commitment. I'm from Sivas, so we do keep our promises. But I also felt compelled to shift the focus in two significant ways after recent reflections. The first is rather technical and related to the content. So the ongoing student and faculty protests and the institutional backlash towards them at universities globally. have pushed me to delve into the details of systemic silencing strategies in general, sort of provide you a category of these systemic silencing strategies even before October 7th, to give you to an idea, and how non-state actors, like young people, can challenge regional and international dynamics, often dominated by institutionalized mechanisms and state powers. The second shift is actually deeply very personal and very recent, and this is something Omer has touched at the beginning of his talk as well. And this has changed how I framed this talk last night, after midnight. This is the incident he was talking about. And so we had a lunch together yesterday. Just this team here. Remzi Abi was with us for a while, then he left, as usual. But after listening to Dr. Abuelaish's life story and the sources of his resilience from him yesterday, I felt that the way I was framing the talk, the meaning I was attaching to it, my positionality, was almost disrespectful. So I'm not saying here that social scientific language or inquiry is orthogonal to morality, but sometimes integrating the personal is necessary to touch the truth. So let me tell you a secret. It's not a secret, really, but yesterday, here on this campus, a Brazilian, an Israeli-American, a Chinese who is among us, and a Turkish were sharing tears over the life story of a Palestinian doctor. Okay? So I know it sounds like one of those jokes, right, that begin with a Turk, a Greek, and a German walks into a bar. But it wasn't a joke at all. It was a profound moment for me that brought me as close as I ever came to the heart of these burning tragedies, and that I'm not part of. With actually two stark reminders. So I took two stark reminders from that experience yesterday. So what are those reminders? Well, we all forget, right? So reminders are important. Sometimes cliche reminders are the best ones. So the first reminder was that led me to question my own sincerity and authenticity. So the devastation wrought by genocide, the anguish of homelessness, the grief of losing loved ones, these only can be fully understood through experience. In acknowledging this, we must approach with humility, not presumption. We must listen, not assume our empathy is sufficient. As one Ottoman divan poet put it, "Şebi yeldai müneccimle muvakkit ne bilir? Müptelayı gama sor kim geceler kaç saat." So, I'm not going to make the job of the translator difficult. So it mainly translates that says, "Neither the astronomer nor the timekeeper knows the length of the longest night. Ask those who are consumed by sorrow how many hours are in the night." Or as we say in Turkish, fire burns where it falls, and only those who have felt the scourge of flames can truly comprehend the pain. This is the first reminder. The second reminder was solidarity is at least as tangible as the pain it seeks to alleviate. Its true power is realized not in theory, but in practice, through the simple and profound act of looking someone in the eye and sharing in their humanity. Yesterday, I felt this to my bones, surrounded by 4 people I had met just a couple of hours ago. It's possible, and it should be possible. And I'm looking in the eyes of a lot of people here, and I hope we are sharing some of the things that we had shared yesterday with these 4 people. I don't want to sound too dramatic, but maybe I do. I don't know. So, okay, so this was the initial part. But next, I also want to sort of provide some systematic discussion of these systemic silencing strategies as well, just to help the cause. Right? Before that, I would like to give you some numbers about the conditions of life in Gaza before the October assault. The UN has been warning for years that Gaza is unlivable as a result of Israel's blockade, and now it's in the 16th year. So some numbers, basic numbers. Let's set the stage, okay? So what we were talking about in Gaza. 70% of people were refugees. 82% were living in poverty. 63% were food insecure. 95% didn't have access to clean water. 95%, no clean water. 45% of the children were living with trauma, depression, or anxiety. 37% of the children reported aircraft sounds as their biggest fear. Picture this, right? You and your family are living under these harsh conditions. What do you want to do? You want to scream, right? You feel an overwhelming urge to scream, to shout out to the world. But what happens then? Well, your screams are systematically stifled, like the helplessness of sleep paralysis during night terrors. You guys know that situation? You have a nightmare, you want to scream, you want to move your muscles, you can't move. That devastation, where your body refuses to move, you're frozen. So countless forces employing myriad of strategies conspire to become your living nightmare. What I will do is I will share some of these strategies and examples, concrete examples with you, just to make sure that what it was like to try to shout out and to be suppressed even before October 7th. Of course, the main category of these policies is Israeli policies, right? Like what? Let's begin with political violence and assassinations. Israeli forces frequently targeted Palestinians, including intellectuals, media spokespeople, in assassination campaigns inside and outside of Palestine. From the start of the Second Intifada, that's 2000, until the end of 2010, Israeli security forces killed around 5,000 Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, at least 240 of them being the subject of targeted killing. You want to raise your voice? You get a bullet. Okay. Protests are repressed. Israel formally suppresses Palestinian dissent and the right to protest through military orders, bans, and brutality against protesters. There's a Military Order 101 issued in 1967, which, in quotes, criminalizes participation in a gathering of more than 10 people without a permit on an issue that could be construed as political. You're more than 10 people, you look political to me. I'll just kick you in the head. You can't carry a flag. You can't publish material that can have political significance. This is the law. There is an anti-boycott law as well, which prevents, which supposedly for prevention of damage to the state of Israel through boycott, and prohibits the public promotion of academic, economic, or cultural boycott by Israeli citizens and organizations against Israeli institutions or illegal Israeli settlement in the West Bank. It enables the filing of civil lawsuits against anyone who calls for a boycott. So this is before October 7th. We're talking about laws here. Okay. Mass surveillance is another thing that was happening. Palestinian occupied territories endure raids, home searches, brutal interrogations. There are more than 1,000 cameras installed in Jerusalem that can identify objects. with a portion of them connected to data analysis servers. Blue Wolf, a smartphone app powered by a massive database of Palestinians' personal information. The database for this application draws from a larger database called the Wolfpack, which seeks to profile every Palestinian living in the West Bank. Each profile contains photographs, a family history, an educational background, and a security rating. You're rated. How dangerous you are. You're 3, you're 6. You might have heard of Pegasus spyware. Israel also utilizes spyware that it manufactures and exports worldwide against Palestinian human rights defenders using Pegasus. Israel can monitor every telephone conversation taking place in West Bank and Gaza, either by implanting bugs into each device that passes through the Kerem Shalom crossing, or monitoring the red networks Jawal and Watania. You're monitored. Attacks on press, civil society, human rights defenders. Numerous journalists have been killed since 2000, at least 45. Before October 7th, 45 journalists were killed. UN expert, I'm quoting a UN expert here, Israel is using counterterrorism legislation and military orders to halt, restrict, and criminalize, legitimize human rights and humanitarian work across Israel. And this is something that has been touched before, so I'm not going to get into the details, but defaming political speech as terrorism or anti-Semitism is happening all the time. So I'm not going to get into the details of that. Well, you can be stripped of your citizenship for disloyalty easily. Israel's Supreme Court ruled that the state can revoke the citizenship of people who carry out actions that constitute a breach of trust against the state, including terrorism, espionage, or treason. In fact, on top of that, the Israeli parliament passed an amendment to the entry into Israel law, which allows the Israel Minister of Interior to revoke the permanent residency status from Palestinian residents of Jerusalem, who the minister deems have breached allegiance to Israel. Really vague, right? I think you breached allegiance. Give me your card. Up to 2018, over 15,000 Jerusalem Palestinians have had their residency revoked before October 7th. Even the archives are silenced. Out of the 15 million files held by Israel's state archives and IDF, only 1.3% are accessible to the public. In 2019, Netanyahu approved an amendment to the archive law, which extends the classification period of some materials from 70 to 90 years, which includes archives of Shin Bet and Mossad. The Ministry of Defense has also been conducted unpublicized visits to non-official archives and confiscating what they call classified documents. You can be denied of entry and travel. The Prime Minister Netanyahu barred US Democratic Congressman Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar from making a planned trip to Israel shortly after then US President Donald Trump called on his ally not to let them in. These were 2 Muslim women elected to Congress and sharp critics of Trump and Israel. Doesn't matter whether you're a US Democratic Congresswoman, you're not let in. It's not just the Israeli government. Palestinian authorities are also suppressing Palestinians. Palestinian authorities are systematically mistreating and torturing Palestinians in detention, including critics and opponents. In 2021, the ICHR received 252 complaints of torture and ill treatment and arbitrary arrest against the PA authorities in the West Bank. There are restrictions on online expression imposed by the Palestinian authorities. The presidential decree detailing the new cybercrime law in 2017 features vague and open-ended language that could lead to prison sentences and heavy fines for criticism of authorities. The cybercrime law grants thin-skinned authorities virtually unrestrained power to block websites, conduct surveillance, and assemble realms of data on ordinary people. Foreign governments are also on top of your head. You want to scream. We were talking about screaming. Israelis, Palestinian government, foreign governments. The U.S. Patriot Act created emergency powers and a legal framework post 9/11, with the UN Security Council following suit with Resolution 1373, which basically has been used by government as an instrument to further cut back on the space of civil society and lawfare groups. Just yesterday, 12 Republican senators threatened ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan with severe consequences for him, his family, and staff if he goes ahead with an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Severe consequences for you and your family as the ICC Chief Prosecutor. And they finish the letter which says, "You've been warned." 12 Republican senators. You want to scream, right? Go ahead and scream. The Jewish National Fund is using American anti-terrorism laws to sue all major Palestinian right groups in the US over its support for international boycott movement. They're doing it every day. There are anti-boycott legislations all over the world. To date, 35 states have adopted laws, executive orders, or resolutions designed to discourage boycotts against Israel. You cannot boycott Israel. Separately, the US Congress is also considering anti-boycott legislation in reaction to the famous BDS movement. Countries such as France, Canada, Germany, Austria, Netherlands, and more have either enforced laws or publicly condemned in parliament BDS or boycotting Israel government. Conflating criticism or Israel with anti-Semitism, Omer talked about it, so I'm not going to get into that. Really briefly, media. When Palestinians face major media, their lives are often narrated by non-Palestinians. A study by Mahanassar revealed that 99% of opinion pieces about Palestinians published by Washington Post was written by non-Palestinians. You can't tell your story. Someone else tells it for you. New York Times did a bit better. 2% of the opinion pieces were written by Palestinians. The New York Times ran the headline, Shireen Abu Akleh, trailblazing Palestinian journalist, dies at 51.
Well, you already had 20 minutes. But
I will just, can I use 2 minutes?
Please do, of course.
So completely failing to even mention how Shireen's death was. It was killed by Israeli forces. Dies suddenly. So, do we have hope? Shall we just give up because we simply cannot fight back and, you know, those people there, however vague they are too powerful? Yes, we do hope all. We do have hope. Solidarity works in mysterious ways. In 2023, amid the harrowing darkness of communication blackouts in Gaza and the tragic loss of lives among journalists, a flicker of resilience shone brightly as Palestinian stories pierced global consciousness, reached billions via social media platforms. The surge of awareness wasn't merely a happenstance, but a profound testament to the relentless spirit of those yearning to share their narratives, often painted in strokes of sorrow and resistance. Platforms like TikTok became unexpected arenas where the voices of the oppressed found a vast audience. In fact, TikTok had to issue a statement in 2023 clarifying that the surge in Palestinian content's popularity was a genuine reflection of global youth sentiments, not the product of algorithmic biases. We can't do anything, it's the people. Well, this clarification was significant, underscoring a shift in content consumption where young people, particularly from Generation Z, are not just passive consumers, but active participants in shaping the narrative. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of my students as well. I do have hope, because I do have hope in Generation Z and their distinct moral framework, which will, I hope, play a pivotal role in this digital uprising, which is also intertwined with the physical uprising. And last sentence is, Generation Z's commitment to a fairer world, seen through their actions, both online and offline, gives me a hopeful vision of what humanity can achieve when empathy and technology merge. And I do keep my hope.
Teşekkür ederiz sevgili Uğur. Now we will have a general discussion. Şimdi bir genel değerlendirmemiz olacak. The word belongs to the floor. Söz serbesttir efendim. İngilizce ya da Türkçe sorabilirsiniz. You can veya yorum yapabilirsiniz. Sormak şart değil elbette ki. You can ask in either languages, English or Turkish, or make any kind of comments. If you have a specific question, also please say to whom you are addressing the question. Somut bir soru varsa kime sorduğunuzda söylemenizi diliyorum. Gördüğüm sırayla buyursunlar. Kendinizi de tanıtırsanız buyurun efendim. Bir saniye mikrofon.
Hello, Mr. Omer. Since you talked about history, about the Israel and Palestine conflict, can you explain the historical roots of the Israel-Palestinian conflict and how they relate to the recent surge in violence on October 7, 2023?
Of course, please.
Yes, thank you. Actually, that's I'm glad you asked that, because the first thing that I wanted to say, if I had time to speak more, is that we need to acknowledge not only the horror that is happening right now in Gaza, but its larger political framework. And the larger framework is Israeli occupation and oppression policies, which can be dated back, obviously, to 1967, but of course go back to 1948. 1948 is the moment at which two things happened at the same time. The State of Israel was established and became an independent, nationally recognized state. And it created that by creating a Jewish majority state from which the vast majority of the Palestinian population was expelled. 750,000 people at the time, and that was about 2/3 of the population of mandatory Palestine. And so, if we want to think about any future prospects, if we want to have hope, then we first of all have to acknowledge the political framework of that. And the political framework is that there has to be an end to the occupation. Now, different people have different ideas what it means to end the occupation. The way I see that is that we have to recognize that there are 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians living on the territory between the Jordan and the sea. Neither of them is going anywhere. They're there. And they have to find a way to share that space with each other. They have to find a political way to share that space. They've tried to kill each other now for 70 years. The State of Israel is much more powerful and has used much more violence and has killed far more Palestinians. But they've tried violence over and over again. and it does not bring any solution to the issue. They have to learn to share the space. How they do that, that's a whole other question. But as you heard, the October 7th, and I totally agree, can be seen as not only a moment of catastrophe, but also a moment of hope. If we agree that we must change the entire political paradigm that had existed until now, and that is to find a way to share the space between these two groups.
Please, buyurun.
Hello, and thank you all for your speeches and very informative talks. So my name is Mohamed Almania, senior economics and finance student here with some studies in international relations. So my question is actually targeted or directed to all of you, and it is regarding the final end envisionment or vision that should be put on the table by policymakers and decision makers and acted or enacted through tactics or politics or short steps. Normally to talk about a two-state solution, it's very clear that there is no such existence of such an idea in the thought of Israeli or Zionist decision makers. And it's also, it seems that it seems like a zero-end game, really. But it's very logical that such a thing is has very heavy dynamics, and it means a very highly, I wouldn't say violent, but very heavy global game, where we will only see much more developments in the coming days. So I would just like to hear, basically, from all of you, your end ideal but also realistic goal that such a conflict that has been going for close to a century, where would it go? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Izzeldin takes this, and of course others may as well. Please.
Thank you so much. You speak about conflict. The conflict is between two equal sides, but they are not equal sides. The Palestinians are occupied, the Israelis are occupier. The Palestinians are oppressed, the Israelis are oppressor. They have the power, as you mentioned, they have the military power, and they are continuing ongoing suppression, occupation, suffering of the Palestinians. And thank you all, really, Dr. Orr, also Arlene, what you described about the situation, and you, Omer. So it's important. And when we speak about it, because you know, the Israelis, when it was established, it wasn't in 1948. It started in the first Zionist conference before 19 centuries. And when they said, and Balfour Promise, 1917, when they said a land without nation for a nation without a land. So I said, if there was no Palestinian nation there, so the Israelis, whom are they fighting now? The Palestinians are existing. They have been there for centuries, and it's their homeland. So it's wrong, and it's a big mistake to say two sides and the conflict between two sides. We want to define, and I define the things. I see, and I agree with you, there are the Palestinian people, it's a living nation within the borders of the historical Palestine, and there is a way to live, and I believe there is hope that October 7 is a silver lining opportunity. But we need the international community in particular, those who are providing impunity to Israel, like the Democratic Party in the States, President Biden, that I lost faith in him. He himself, he said, you should not be Jewish in order to be a Zionist. And if Israel wasn't created, we have to create Israel. That's what he declared it. So we are not fighting Israel. You know whom in Gaza, whom they are fighting? They are fighting 6 countries: France, Germany, Italy, UK, America, and Canada. It's 6 countries who are fighting, providing, and pouring weapons against the Palestinians. I think Palestinians should be proud that they are fighting these superior, and that the Palestinians are superior. So I believe the only way, it's not two-state solution. It's the only way to have one state solution, because the two-state solution is dead and Israel killed it. And we need to ask Israel, which has been independent and recognized by the international community, it's the only country in the world without well-defined borders. So they have to define their borders and to define their constitution. So the only way to save Israel from their self-destructive act of their administration to go forward with one state solution with equal citizenship rights.
Thank you. Omer, would you like to add anything on this?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Look, I mean, obviously there's complete asymmetry of power. But as you say, the current crisis is bad for everyone. It's much more destructive for the Palestinians. But right now, I would say that the population in this entire region feels greater sense of insecurity than it has ever felt since 1948. And so what is the solution? I would love to see a one-state solution. I fear that most people living there want two things. And those don't include right now a one-state solution. They want a right of self-determination, and they want a right of return. I think these are the two basic demands for both. Israel has that. It has created the state, and it has a law of return. So, as was said, any Jew in the world who wants to become an Israeli citizen can come to Israel and become an Israeli citizen. And Palestinians have neither. Now, the two-state solution, the traditional two-state solution, is defunct. There's no way to do that anymore because of the policy of occupation that numerous Israeli administrations, not only Netanyahu, but for a very long time, have pursued. This goes back to Labour Party governments in Israel. It goes back to the 1970s. So that's a long-term project, the settlement project. So how do you square this circle of having self-determination and having a right of return and yet being unable any longer to create two separate states? So the one solution that I am, or plan that I'm associated with and that I think is not at the immediate present, but in the future is feasible, you can look it up, you can Google it, it's called A Land for All. And the idea of that plan is that there would be two states. They would be along the 1967 lines, but they would make a distinction between citizenship and residence. So people could be citizens of one country and residents of another. If they're residents of the other country, they would have to follow the rules of that country, but they would vote for the parliament of the country of their citizenship. So if you think about a Frenchman who lives in Berlin, he can live in Berlin or she can live in Berlin. They have to follow the rules of Germany, but they vote for the French parliament or the French president, whoever they're voting for. That would make it possible for Palestinians who live in Houston, Texas, but who trace themselves to refugees, to come back to either Palestine or to come back to Haifa, where their family may have come from, and they would be citizens of Palestine, but they would be living in Haifa. That would make it possible for settlers who live around Nablus to remain where they are, but they would be citizens of Israel and would have to obey the rules of Palestine. And if they break those rules, they could be deported. In that way, you would have a confederate system where this whole territory, which is completely now inextricably linked, would remain so. You would have confederate institutions at the top, which would take care of this entire territory and of its security and of its foreign policy. You would have a capital for both states in Jerusalem, and both countries could have both a right of self-determination and a right of return.
Thank you very much. much. And Arlene wants to add something on this, please.
Yes, well, as an international community, as I was saying before, it's not up to me to decide a vision for the future, right? It's up to me to listen to what is being said, to listen especially to the ones who historically have not had voice, which are those who are oppressed, dispossessed, and so forth, who are the Palestinian, and what their demands are and what their vision is. Now, still from the perspective of the international community, you know, in the first 20 minutes I had, I couldn't go deeper into anything. We don't have time. But, you know, in Brazil, as in most Latin American countries, and I have colleagues working with this issue in other countries, and we speak to each other regularly, there's a clear difference between what academia, civil society movements, and so on tend to, you know, imagine when they think, because they are listening to the Palestinian and Israeli and so on, and what governments declare. Every time the Brazilian and Latin American countries in general make a declaration about Palestine, like just today, there was a very good declaration condemning the invasion of Rafah. But at the end, the government always finishes saying, and the Brazilian government reiterates the defense of the two-state solution. You know, it's like it's dead. You know, why do they continue doing that? Why do they continue saying that? Why can't they just not say anything and say, okay, let's be open? Well, in part because they think that this is a way of saying, okay, we want a solution. As international community, we want a solution. And the only one that has been really on the table has been this one, right? But it, in another sense, it also ties, you know, the vision. You get used to looking through certain constraints which are put by the two-state solution, which, by the way, is not only is dead, but, in my opinion, as in many scholars that I refer to, read and study, so on, it was a dead solution from the beginning, because you cannot see practical steps leading in any moment to the two-state solution. I mean, settlements continued to be built even while Oslo was being discussed. Oslo did not discuss final status issues, did not discuss borders, did not discuss Jerusalem, did not discuss... So it was just an interim, right, thing, and a plan to pass responsibility from the occupier to the occupied over municipal aspects of the society. So the obligation of the occupier ended in the vision of many of those who were supporting the occupier, right? Not in the vision of international law and the United Nations, but in the vision of, so you know, the responsibility over the life of the Palestinians, which the occupier in international law has, it passed over to the Palestinian Authority that was created for this purpose, together with a police force whose objective was to stop Palestinian resistance. Demonstrations against the occupier. That was the meaning of that police force. So it was a whole package there that never meant to lead to another state. And always it was obfuscating, you know, the fact that it was not leading to another state. So that is dead, right? And if you look at the situation on the ground, you have one state. But this state is a state of apartheid. That's the situation on the ground. So when people say, "No, the one-state solution is an illusion. It's not possible." You know, you have one state, but it's a state that does not grant human rights, does not grant civil rights for all the population. So you heard one formula here, very interesting, brought about by our colleague Omar. We've heard the Palestinian voice also on this, no? And I think that's where we stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlene. Buyursunlar. I asked him already. He passed on that. Thank you. Not that he doesn't want, but
I used too much time.
Okay.
Can I ask my question?
Just a moment. Sorry, siz söz mü istediniz? Somebody had already asked, but next you will have it. Sorry.
Yeah. I will ask or not.
Okay. Beyefendi, hanımefendiye versem sözü önce olur mu? Okay, please do ask it. Please do ask it. Ondan sonra da size vereceğim.
Thank you for firstly to make this happen for Bilgi University, and thank you to all of you for this insightful speech and moving speech. My question is directed to all, but especially Mr. Abuelaish. In the beginning of his speech, he asked a question. He asked that how we can we change context for Palestinian people. And this question, as I see, stayed unanswered. Now I want to ask him how we can change context for Palestinian people, because as I understand, all we can do is this. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
We can change the context, because the context and what is happening now, it's man-made. It's people who are doing it to us. So it's our responsibility to change it, and the people who are doing it to prevent it from continuing with it. And what I believe now, the priority for us as Palestinians, number one, to stop the killing of the Palestinians, to stop the bloodshed. This is the top priority now, saving lives. And that's what we call provide humanitarian aids. This is important. Rebuild the Gaza Strip, and then the political solution that we needed based on the international resolutions. We need to resume trust in the international law. If we don't have that international law and to live in the jungle and anyone to do whatever they want, and as you mentioned, Palestinians to come to Haifa as a resident, and the Israeli, the settler who is living in the West Bank, to be a citizen of Palestine, this is another apartheid. Why the settler in the West Bank to be a citizen of Palestine?
No, that's a misunderstanding. No, it's
Can you clarify in 2 moments?
It's a misunderstanding. The idea is that the settler would be a citizen of Israel and a resident of Palestine, and a Palestinian could be a citizen of Palestine and a resident of Haifa.
But he's returning to his home. The Palestinian who is coming from Haifa, if I go back to my village, I have, you are Turkish. You know the taboo? The taboo is in Istanbul. The taboo of Palestinian land, it's in Turkey. All of the land of Palestine is in Turkey here. So we have the taboo of our land. So when I go, I am not going as a visitor or as a resident. I am going back to my home. The settler, he never been there. He is coming from the States or from Canada, from Europe, and he is a colonizer, as you mentioned, Ed. He is a colonizer. He should never be a resident or a citizen of that area. And that's the problem of Israel. What are they doing? What they have, what they conquered, is they have it. They own it. What the Palestinians have, they want to share it with Palestinians. What is going on in this world? We need the land. We need our rights and equal citizenship rights. And that's what is important. No Palestinian, I will tell you, I am hopeful. I was worried about my children when I went to Canada. My youngest son, Abdullah, he was 6 years old. What is going? Is he going to forget his homeland? Till one time, he went to teach English in Spain. I spoke with Abdullah. And then I saw Abdullah, he is now 21. He is hanging in his room, Palestine flag. I said, from where do you have it? He said, I took it with me. So Palestine is in our hand, in our hearts, in our minds. It moves with us. And the only way, the Israelis, I say to them clearly, their future, their security, their safety, their independence, their dignity, and their freedom is linked and dependent on the Palestinian safety, security, freedom, and the future. The only way is equal rights, and the right of the return is on the top of that as the law of the return.
Look, I mean, I sort of agree. I just think we need to think in slightly more practical terms, because the problem with democracies, if you believe in democracy, and not everybody
Which
does.
democracy?
But if you believe in democracy, the problem is that you have to persuade the people to carry out policies. If the people don't agree with your policies, that you can either impose them, or the people will change the government that imposes these policies. So I want to say, look, the reason that I was born in Israel in 1954 is that in 1935, my mother, who was 11, came from Poland. Between 1941 and 1944, my entire family was murdered in Poland, and the entire community that they lived in was murdered, and the entire culture and civilization that was Jewish culture and civilization in Eastern Europe was murdered. So I was born because my grandfather made a decision to take his daughter, who was then aged 11, to Palestine. That's how I became an Israeli. I can't go back to the town that my mother came from. I don't even have a taboo for that. I know where the house was, but I don't have the taboo because the Germans burnt everything down. Does that give me a right to occupy other people? No, of course not. But there are now millions of people who live in that area between the Jordan and the sea. And if you want to do what Rector wrote, which is based on Mahmoud Mamdani, who wrote that about South Africa, if you want to make the colonizer indigenous, what the colonizer needs to do is to recognize the right of both people on the land. The colonizer has to stop being a colonizer and become like the indigenous. And the indigenous has to accept the colonizer as a person of equal rights. If you don't do that, then you are eternalizing, perpetuating the conflict. That's a very hard thing to do, because history is not just. You talk about transfer. The first time the transfer idea came up in 1937 with the Peel Commission, what they pointed to was Turkey. What they pointed to was the successful population transfer of 1923 of 1.5 million Turks and Greeks. That was seen as a good thing, and that was the model for how a partition would take place. When we talk about settler colonialism, there is no greater example of settler colonialism than the global South. South America is the epitome of settler colonialism and the destruction of indigenous populations. We cannot take that back. We have to find a way for people to live peacefully with each other in equality and dignity. If they want one state, that would be fantastic. And I think that eventually, in the future, that might happen. But if they don't want it, we cannot impose it on them. We have to find a way that they will be able to live either side by side in multiple mixed communities. As you know, there are multiple mixed towns, cities, where there are Palestinians and Jews living side by side. How to learn with each other, how to learn how to live with each other in whatever political settlement it is done, as long as people accept the right of both people to live there. If they deny the other side the right to live there, what they're doing is perpetuating eternal violence.
Thank you. Arlene has a short comment, please.
The only comment I want to make is on the part that Omer was saying regarding South America. No? Once I organized a course with several Palestinian professors at my university, and the first class, Saad Nimr, he was very worried about, not comparing the Palestinian to the South American indigenous, because the Palestinians don't want to be compared to the South American indigenous, because the South American indigenous were eradicated, right. And that was 500 years ago. So historically, it's such a different context. Today we have international law and human rights, so we cannot accept. Of course, comparisons can be made. In history, we're a historian, we can always compare, but to see the difference, but I just wanted to bring this, that I was very much struck by the fact that Saad Nimr was so worried about not being compared to the South American indigenous.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omer. Your parents, they came from Poland before 48, and they were welcomed in Palestine as a Palestinian Jews. They were Palestinian Jews. They have the Palestinian citizenship, and they were welcomed in Palestine to be included in Palestine. So Palestine was welcoming and was an open country to welcome all of Jews who left Europe and they were discriminated against in Palestine, and many of them, if you see them, they mentioned we are Palestinians, as Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Christians, because Palestine is diverse. Muslims, Jewish, Christians, Jews, atheists, and we are proud of that. And that's what we need to understand, that not they came as a Jew. They came and they became Palestinians as Turkish Jews, as Canadian Jews, and that's what we need to understand it. But no one can deprive the Palestinians of their rights to live in their homeland.
Thank you very much. Beyefendi, demin sizin söz sıranızı aldık. Bağışlayın, buyurun söz sizin.
İsmim Uğur Karaca, ben bir hukukçuyum. Aylin Hanım'a soruyorum. Sorudan ziyade bir yaklaşım. Söylenenler oldukça doğru ve olması gereken çözümler, ama bazen olması gereken çözümler olmaz oluyor. Yani imkansız oluyor. Çünkü İsrailliler kendilerinin özel olduğunu, İsrailoğullarının özel olduğunu ve o toprakların da kendilerine tahsis edildiğini düşünüyor. Ayrıca uluslararası askeri güçte bunu destekliyor. Yani bunlar ikna edilemez bir teolojik anlayış ortaya koyuyorlar. Yani Firavun'un Musa'ya yaptığını İsrail bugün Filistin'e yapıyor. Öyleyse Musa'nın Firavun'a yaptığı gibi onları boşa çıkarmak gerekiyor. Yani savaşı durdurmak gerekiyor. Filistin halkına başka yerlerde konforlu bir hayat sağlayalım. Bunun bedelini hep beraber ödeyelim. Mübadele yapalım. Gelen İsraillerin yerlerini, oradaki özel yaşam koşullarını onlara tahsis edelim. Böyle bir çözümü niçin düşünmüyoruz? Niçin insanların ölmesine fırsat veriyoruz?
Önerdiğiniz çözümü bir daha söyler misiniz doğru tercüme edebilmem için?
Musa'nın Firavun'a yaptığı şeyi bırakıp gidiyor ya Firavun'a o toprakları. Biz de Filistinlileri konforlu yaşayacakları yere taşıyalım. Bedelini biz de ödeyelim, ben de ödeyeyim. Yani bir mübadele gibi bir şey yapalım. Nasıl Yunanistan'la Türkiye mübadele yapmıştı ya, onun gibi bir şey. Bu daha uygulanabilir bir çözüm. Hiç düşünmüyoruz bunu.
What is the question?
Efendim?
What is the question?
Okay, sure. Of course, we must make a general translation. Mr. Uğur, who is a lawyer, who asks whether we can have a concrete solution where the Palestinians can be moved to some comfort, to a zone where they can live more comfortably. Yani Filistinlilerin daha güzel ve rahat yaşayacakları bir yere taşınmasını mı düşünüyorsun?
Çeşitli ülkelerde çeşitli yaşam alanları oluşturuyor.
Başka ülkelerde. Okay.
Tabii.
Okay, in some other countries. So whether they could move to, they can be moved to some other countries where they can live in better comfort. Yes.
What? Really? Whom do you want to answer this question? It's the Palestinians.
Okay.
No,
Well,
we have to speak. The question is about Palestinians.
it will come to you, but
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you so much.
Just a moment. Would you like to make any comment?
Really, you know,
Since
for
it was
your-
Just a moment.
directed,
Of course, I will give you the floor.
Yeah, really, you
no,
know,
I'd be happy.
Okay.
But since it was
Arlene diyor
directed,
ki
I would
bunu
just say.
Filistinlilere sormakta fayda var. İzzeldin Bey'e yöneltiyor.
Sorry to interrupt, because this is the problem. You are talking about Palestinians, and we ask others to decide for the Palestinians. What is going on, and to suggest solutions for the Palestinians? We have the right to decide for ourselves. We are mature, we are educated, we are the owner of the land, and we have the right to decide for ourselves. No one else, others should support what we decide and what decisions we make.
Thank you very much. Zuhal Hocam.
Thank you very much for very mind-opening and deep and broad discussions. It's a unique place, a unique opportunity for Istanbul Bilgi University to have such a... You cannot... Okay, anyway, it was a general thank you. I just wanted to make a note that there's this term called scholasticide, and it's been very significant in what's happening recently since the October 2023. It's not just killing, it's targeted. So that has to be noted since we are in an academic situation, a context, and we cannot ignore what's happening, the selectiveness of the killings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Çok teşekkür ederiz hocam. Buyurun. Zuhal Hoca'nın arkasındaki beyefendiyi gördüm. İsim bilmediğim için kusura bakmayın, anca böyle işaret edebildim. Buyurun.
Hello, this is Mohammed from Anadolu Agency. I'm here to cover your event today. Thank you for participation.
Anadolu Agency is the press news agency.
Sorry. My question will be to Uğur Hoca. When we read the news from Western countries about Gaza, the way of their covering is a bit different. For example, in the context of killed and died. Because when they use, for example, people killed in Gaza, they use the killed in Gaza, but when they use in the Israel, they use died. My question would be, what do you think is the impact of this one-sided view of the West on the Western society's perception of Gaza?
Shall I? Of course. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, framing is everything, right? So that was one of the examples I gave. You know, a Palestinian person dies, but a Jew is murdered, kind of. So if you control the language, you control the thoughts, perceptions, and the perception. So we know that social psychology teaches us, you know, how biased information processing sets everything, sets all the preferences. So, so you enforce this sort of frame of mind, and you create an echo chamber, you create cues, you create heuristics, and you shape preferences. All attitudes or preferences are shaped using those languages. And especially given that we are living in our bubbles, we are only exposed to the sources that we are already close. That language is that the language that we use, those framings that we are exposed to, enforces the already existing polarization structure. So it's a vicious cycle, and we cannot get exposed to truth. We are just exposed to what we already believe in, and that's a big problem, because without unbiased information processing, I'm using a cognitive science language here, we cannot establish the truth. And that's a big issue, especially given the amount of information that we are exposed today, right? It's not just a paper we buy in the morning from the local agency. It's flowing from WhatsApp groups, from Facebook, from Instagram. And it is basically an attack. It's basically a warfare now happening on that language, absolutely.
Thank you. Buyurun efendim. Arkadaki hanımefendiyi gördüm. Siz evet, buyurun. Bir mikrofon, can we...
Hi, I'm a student in Bilgi University. I'm a psychology student, and I'm asking question in context of increasing international pressure by speaking up. People from different backgrounds have been protesting in Turkey since October, but apart from so-called support from government, there has been no change in the economical and political ties with Israel. But recently, an aggressive suppression of another Muslim youth movement by police attracted the attention of the Muslim right-wing or pro-government masses, which has been protesting since October, and their only address was actually America or Israel or the West. At this point, the Turkish government has come to the point of canceling its commercial agreements. This may be a questionable decision, but it made its voice in media, and it created a little pressure, international pressure. So my question is, I find such reactions in which masses with closer ties to each other can reach decision makers more functional. And I wonder what an example of this could be in America and how limits can be pushed. What are the bodies that can put direct pressure on decision makers? My question is to all of you.
Who will take this? Oh, yes, Arlene, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity also, because once again, you know, in 20 minutes, I could only introduce the subject and not go into the discussion. So that's exactly the point. Everything that is being done is too much, too little, too late, no, and not enough. So we need civil society and social movements, to pressure the governments, even in the global south. It's not because it's global south that they will automatically, you know, start to take cases to the International Court of Justice, lawsuits and this and that, and try to isolate Israel until it is forced to comply with international law. And we haven't seen this happen, by the way. No. So it's the organizations that can do this, the forces that can do this, are the forces in society. The social movements, you know, each country's social movements, students, constituencies, civil society, if they are not vocal, if they are not pressuring governments, governments will not move, even in the global south. That's a fact. That's a total fact. So when I said Lula finally, one day before the case on South Africa, supported, it's because civil society was pressuring for months. You know, so it's not easy. Even in our countries, it's not easy. Even in the countries that are not directly supporting Israel, it's not easy. But the struggle has to be done. It's the only way. And the only way is really through creating some kind of constraint. The constraint is to have the end of contracts, commercial contracts, military contracts, investment, university contracts. The only way. You know, if you don't have the power to immediately stop the genocide, you have to create the constraint through other means, and it's through isolation. And isolation comes through economic, military, etc., acts like this.
Thank you very much. Well, we have civil society pressure outside, students who are willing to get in the classroom, so I will be able to get, okay, 2 more questions, and okay, so the last, but you already have asked, so sir, I will be starting by you, but please be concise and quick.
Okay, so my question is to Özdemir Hocam. You talked about digital activism. It's new, it's great, it's lovely. It primarily affects those in the demographic from 18 to 35. We are 10 years removed from power. And people who make these decisions are older, and our screams don't reach to them. There is dissonance between our governments and us in the in the global south and in the global north as well, because governments necessarily don't represent our views anymore. How do I scream louder? How do I, before 10 years are up, before we are in power, how do we scream louder? Is digital activism, like, can we do more? Because in America, TikTok was a huge thing, and now they moved to ban it in a year or sell it off to a US subsidiary. So can we scream louder?
Yeah, hopefully we can. So you're right. Representation doesn't work perfectly, and you know those who govern us are not really reflecting the preferences of the masses. But accountability is not only achieved through digital activism. Of course, you're right. So I mean, and it makes people feel better. Oh, I signed a petition. I sent 2 TikTok videos. So it can create this false relief of doing their part, that's for sure. But they will have to respond. Remember the previous events, the global solidarity events before. Vietnam, right? They had to respond at the end, right? Somehow. So resistance and resilience is the key. You have to keep it up. You have to keep it up as much as they keep it up. And history is full of examples where at the end they have to respond. I'll keep it short, but if you want to chat, we'll chat.
Yeah, I just want to add to this that, And as Uğur just mentioned, both the case of the United States in Vietnam and the case of France with the war in Algeria, public protests actually made a big difference. Now, it made a big difference because there was a lot of protests, and there was a lot of protests because those young people who were demonstrating about themselves. They were afraid of being sent to fight a war that they didn't want to fight. Right now, I think what is happening in the United States is actually, I find it very encouraging, because these are not the young people, the students who are demonstrating are not about to be sent to fight in the Middle East. They are demonstrating because they feel that there are human rights at stake and that their government is enabling it, and that they, as taxpayers, are actually funding it. So they feel also that they are complicit in that. And I think that what we older people need to do is to make it possible for younger people to keep their rights, to be able to demonstrate, and that we need to protect them in doing that while the government and other institutions in the United States are trying to shut it down.
Do you think things would have developed differently if there another government had been in charge of Israel since October 7th? I mean, do you think there is a direct link between the current politics and the current situation happening in Gaza?
I can quickly say there is and there isn't. That is that the current government and the current prime minister wants the war to continue. He has no interest in stopping the war, because if the war ends, he will lose power. If he makes an agreement, he loses his coalition, and he may go to jail. So he has a very personal stake. But there is a larger context. And the larger context is that other people in his cabinet, the so-called less radical, are also supporting this war. And in fact, that the large majority of people right now in Israel, of Israeli citizens, while they want their prime minister to go to hell, more or less, they also want the war to continue. And so there isn't right now a clear alternative while Netanyahu should absolutely go. I think, however, that if he were to be removed in one way or another by, the powers that be or any other way, then there would be more space for opposition to this policy created. And again, you have to understand, as I was saying before, it will be because people think it's no longer in their interest, because the economy is ruined, because the country is isolated, because it's become weaker rather than stronger, because it lost its deterrence. That is what will bring about the election of politicians who will choose another policy. It may be cynical, but people act first of all in their self-interest. If they see this war is not in their self-interest, and I think it clearly is not, if people understand that, then they will find an alternative leadership. And the same will happen with Palestinians. Palestinians also need another leadership. Their leadership has led them in very bad directions, I would argue, and I think that the situation right now can produce another leadership more capable to seek a compromise between these two groups.
The very last word is Izzeldin's, and
you so
be
much.
concise, please.
I believe the momentum has started and the change is happening. Concerning the civil society, the social movements, we need to continue to be cumulative, incremental, persistent, and creative, and to continue with it, not to rest till we achieve our goal. We need all of us, I believe in that. We need all of us to come together, men, women, children, elders, and to have, most important, confidence, and to keep the hope alive. And most important, faith and hope, it needs actions. So keep your actions persistent and creative, and be determined to say an end to this occupation.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, of course I will not make a general conclusion. Simply I wish to say that we are certainly aware that the world will not be a better place just because we made this panel. However, we all believe that the world will be a better place, yes, a more just,
a more peaceful, a more human place. And if it will be so, it will be thanks to this kind of exchange where we try to understand each other, where we exchange as human beings, as brothers. So I wish to thank all the participants, but there is someone, a hidden architect of this organization. Mehmet, if you can come please. Bütün bu toplantının gizli mimarı Mehmet Can. Onu da alkışlamanızı istiyorum. Lütfen hep beraber. Lütfen. Well, he is always very humble. Ve bütün konuşmacılara şükranlarımızı sunuyorum. We are grateful to all participants. Thank you very much. Efendim tabii ki sizlere de katıldığınız için şükranlarımızı sunuyoruz. And we thank all participants. Thank you very much.